and welcome to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. So excited to be studying today with a wonderful group of people representing several states and at least two countries. Now I'm on mute. Well, okay, now try it again. Welcome everybody to the Wednesday class that shall not be named. Welcome to David and Michael and Lou, Ron and Arlene, Flossie, Karen, and of course the millions of people watching on YouTube who are very intimidated by Karen and her intellectual prowess. So today we are continuing the study of biographies of famous Zionists who helped create the state of Israel. We began with Theodor Herzl, who was, the man who knocked over the domino. We talked, though, about the fact that he was just looking for a Zionism. What kind of Zionism came up later on from people like Rav Kook, who helped create religious Zionism, and Jabotinsky and Trumpeldor, who created more of a military protect ourselves Zionism. We have a reference to Ahad Ha'am, who had more of like a atheistic, socialistic view of Zionism, but we're going to talk about the two most important characters in the creation of state, along with Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl, as we know, got the ball rolling, but he died in 1904, so very long before all the other stuff was going. So the two most important people after Theodor Herzl are Chaim Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion. Now, there's tons of others. Those are not the two most important exception. There's tons of others who had an influence, but these would be the movers and shakers that helped define what Israel would be. David Ben-Gurion, more from inside Israel. Chaim Weizmann, more from outside Israel. They sometimes got along, sometimes they didn't, but they will certainly begin. So we're going to start with Weizmann. If we don't have time for Ben-Gurion, we'll just do Ben-Gurion next week. Next week, the week after, because there will be no class next week as I'm at a conference. But let's start with Weizmann, and if we get through him, I don't want to rush too much, we'll go to David Ben-Gurion. David Ben-Gurion obviously is more famous. His name has lasted through the ages more than Weizmann. A lot of people, when they think Weizmann, they think Ezra Weizmann, who was a politician in Israel, and of course, the relation to. So when we look at Chaim Weizmann, and we are looking at the man who considered himself the heir apparent to Theodor Herzl and was. And when we look at David Ben-Gurion, we're going to see two people who have similar backgrounds in many ways, but come from very different perspectives. So who is Chaim Weizmann? As with most of the early Zionist leaders we're going to talk about, he is, of course, born in Eastern Europe, or in this case, or Russia, in this case, Russia. And he came from a small village, which is now Belarus. So he's part of the Russian Empire in 1874. He's born before the Great Pogrom. And we're hearing some background music, so I'm going to put people on let's see here.
Mute.
Mute. Okay. But you can just, if you need to talk, just say stuff. No worries. All right. So he's born in Russia from a small town. He is going to Cheder like everybody else. He's studying Hebrew, though, also, but not from a Zionist perspective. It's just obviously Hebrew for studies, for, the Bible and for Talmud. And he, while doing this, he starts to become very involved in the Zionist movement pre-Theodor Herzl. So already before Herzl comes into the main front, he's already displaying some sort of support as a young boy. We're talking 18. But before that, he shows a great intellect. Even though he's in a small town, he shows great intellect and science. And so he is obviously probably not allowed to go to that type of schooling in Russia. So he goes to Germany and he studies there as he teaches Hebrew to, to people, to young Jews studying, Talmud. And so he gets his degree probably in Germany, in Berlin. But while there, we're talking now 1896, 1897, he starts to get involved with this small Zionist group that's starting to grow, which just grows a lot more when, of course, Theodor Herzl, he goes to Switzerland, he starts studying there. He is not able to go to the first Zionist Congress, but he goes to the second one. So he goes to the second one. He's a brilliant student. He's studying for what would be equivalents of PhDs and succeeding very well. And I will go over some of the science, and I can quite frankly tell you I don't understand any of it. I know the point of it, but I don't understand any of it at all. So some of you might be able to help me there. I know what the reason, how the science helped him do something to help the state of Israel, but I don't understand it. So just, he's in Switzerland and he's studying. So he's in this really incredible intellectual circle that is Europe at this time. Remember, this is Europe, the end of the 19th century, when intellectual prowess is what is really dominating the headlines. Everybody's thinking that science is going to save the world, and you have all of these intellects meeting in Paris, in London, in Switzerland, in Germany, all over the place. We've talked about it, and not a small percentage were Jewish. And in this world, there was a lot more equality among the scientists. Obviously, the institutions, not as much. And so he is in this world. He's dating, he falls in love, he gets married to a different woman. Meanwhile, not ironically, his family proves to be very smart as well. So he is the most famous, but he has siblings who become very well-known scientists as well. Some of them end up in Israel. He has, I think, 15 siblings. So he has 15 siblings, which, if you didn't know, is a lot. So it's a lot of siblings. It's more siblings than my children are going to have. That's all I'm saying, in case anybody ever asks. So he's got a lot of siblings. Some of them are scientists. Some of them are supporting the Zionist movement. One is an anti-Zionist who is a total supporter of getting rid of the Zionists, of the Stalin, and of course what happens to his one sibling who stays a doctor in Russia who supports Stalin, and another who is an anti-Zionist Stalin. What happens? Stalin, of course, eventually goes after them. Goes after the doctors, goes after the anti-Zionists. He claims they're Zionists, and none of them, I don't think, were killed. A lot of them ended up in Israel. Actually, one of his sisters was part of a spy ring in World War I. She was dating a German who actually became a Nazi later on. So he's in this world where he is living in Europe. He's got his family. I think one of his brothers became a dairy farmer in Ireland, or maybe it was his son. I don't remember. I think his son became a dairy farmer in Ireland. Obviously, we all know that Ezra Weizmann is not his son. It's his either nephew or great nephew. Would later become president of Israel. So he's a scientist. He's a Zionist just when it's starting to pick up some steam. He's in Geneva, organic chemistry. and he becomes a professor there. So he's professor at Geneva, and eventually he moves to the UK. So he lives in Manchester. He's a professor there at whatever university, and he becomes very prominent as a scientist, very well known. And he actually starts to meet in very important circles. He meets Arthur Balfour. He meets Winston Churchill, two of the most famous people. And he is already starting to be in this because he's a great intellect. And so he's befriending them, probably with the idea that they will help him in the future. But remember, this is not the point in time where Britain is in control of Palestine. The Ottomans are in control of Palestine. It's before World War I. So there's no idea that Britain can help them, because he's also negotiating with, helping others negotiate with the Ottomans to purchase land in Israel. So, but he's a very becomes very diehard supporter of Britain, even becomes a citizen. And so with all the patents, all the money he's making a lot of money because he sells the patents to companies and he gets whatever the royalties. I don't know. And so he's prominent, he's a Zionist, he's a scientist, he's living in Britain. Britain, obviously, at this time, this period in time, is the most powerful country in the world. They own China and India, parts of Africa, their navy, everything. So that is a good place to create connections, and that's how he is going to do his thing. So what happens is, and this is where anybody's scientific background, he figures out a way right around World War I, right, to use, and anybody here want to help Michael, maybe? Anybody's? So I had to look it up, to use industrial fermentation to create other things. And one of those things was an explosive. So, which the military, especially who is the military defense, David Lloyd George, is the one who realized that this could be a big deal, because once World War I starts, they don't have access as easily to all of their properties around the world. And so all the ingredients they need to make explosives are not as readily accessible. But with this new process, which I have no idea how it's done, they had access to making a lot more dynamite, a lot more. Whatever this fermentation process gave them the opportunity to have the necessary amount of bombs and munitions and whatever to help them succeed in the war. So obviously, this made Chaim Weizmann a very well-known person in England during the war. I mean, he was a very, very important person. He knew everybody. He was the kind of guy who could get a meeting with the prime minister, with Churchill, during the war. So he became a real supporter of the British government and was very well known. And at the same time as he's doing all this research, he started he's going to start, he's kind of like the father of intellectual Zionism. He believed one of the ways that Israel was going to really set itself apart was through science. So he would start making trips to Israel and was looking at finding ways to create this type of Zionism. And so he works with Nobel Prize winners. He eventually starts the Weizmann Institute. That's what it's called. Helps start the Technion, which is the first big one. The Technion's still there. The Weizmann Institute, which obviously was not what it was called. At the beginning, it was called something else, and it was named right before he died, the Weizmann Institute. And all this time, he is working with people like Arthur Balfour, who was the prime minister before the war and stays a prominent, I think he becomes foreign minister or foreign secretary, whatever it's called. And so during the war and before, he helped promote the idea of a Jewish state in Uganda. That was one of the original ideas. Why? Because Uganda was controlled by who? It was actually going to be Kenya, by the British. They controlled it, so they weren't looking for Israel. But as soon as all of the people who were coming to the Zionist Congress and all the people became Zionists, what did they all want? They only wanted one place. They wanted Palestine. So the early Zionists, like Herzl, didn't care where. But later, the majority wanted Israel or Palestine. So he started changing his view and telling everybody, hey, this is what we want. We want you to help us even before England controlled the area. But once they went to war, and there was a realization that Britain could end up controlling this area, that changed the viewpoint on what they needed to do. So we started meeting and encouraging the government to create ways to figure out what they're going to do. He worked with a lot of people, everybody from Ahad Ha'am to Israel Seif, to Simon Marx. These are very wealthy people. To, of course, Sykes, who would create Mark Sykes, who would create the famous Sykes-Picot. And he is finding not universal support. He's finding in the government, some are supportive, some are not. But among the Jewish community, a lot of people obviously are not very supportive. They're part of the Bund, the anti-Zionists. And why? For the same reason that everybody is who is anti-Zionist and anti-Zionist, because we want to live in Britain. We're British citizens. Life is not perfect. There is anti-Semitism, but it's nothing like what was going on in Tsarist Russia, nothing that's going on in Poland. The Jews in Britain are doing very well comparatively to most times in history. And they don't want to rock the boat, and they want to say, look, we're British citizens. This is what we want. So you have this tension behind the small group of Zionists, led by probably the most prominent Jew, or one of the most prominent Jews in England, versus probably the majority who were against it. So Weizmann, during this time, he has become part of the military. He's part of the laboratories, or whatever, the science war department. He knows David Lloyd George. He knows Balfour. He meets with the Rothschilds. He is very persistent. He's one of these people who is always in motion and is very, very easy to talk to, despite being a brilliant scientist. And when one Rothschild doesn't agree to support him, what do? You go to another Rothschild until you find a Rothschild that supports you. And he finally found one. I don't know which one it was. I forget. The main one didn't, but one of the children did, because not everybody agreed. And so he's going to parties, he's promoting, preaching, but he is not a very overtly pushy, annoying guy. He's pretty outgoing. And at this time, he's working to create Zionist organizations in England, internationally. He is working with the War Council, with Lord Balfour. He's working with financiers like the Rothschilds. He's also writing. So he is a guy who's in motion all the time. And England, of course, is going back and forth. You know, they want to support the idea of Jews moving there. They don't want to rock the boat with the Arabs. It goes back and forth depending on what's going on. But of course, he starts to create the idea that we need to figure out what we're going to do. Once the war's over, what are we going to do? You have people like Edwin Montagu, who was a very popular Jewish personality, and he is dead sense against this, and he is very connected as well. But then you have people like Mark Sykes, who is very high up and respected and goes on a mission. And eventually he will work with his counterpart, Francis George Picot, in France, to create what is known as the Sykes-Picot suggestion, which then eventually becomes part of English law. So he gets Lord Balfour to create this famous Balfour Declaration on behalf of the government that there should be some sort of place for Jews in this area. It's not a state thing, but certainly the most important document that Jews will get to support the idea of a Jewish state, because it's written by the British government and it says you will have a right to do something there. Larry. And I got to unmute for just a second. All right. I asked you, there you go.
Yeah, I've never read the Balfour Declaration. Does it indicate any homeland for the Palestinians as well? Is that the document that, or is that later on with the UN?
Well, there's a lot of documents we're talking about. Now you got to remember, there's a lot of them. So for us using the Balfour Declaration, they have the Sykes-Picot document. There's the UN. This basically says is a place for Jews, a minority Jewish population in this region. So it doesn't, I don't believe, say anything about creating a divided one. It's a very bland document. I'll read it to you. Actually, I lost it for a second. His Majesty's government view with favor of the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights, political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So it's a very general statement. It doesn't say there's going to be a country of Israel, and it just says we're giving you, we believe this is a good idea, basically. But it is an actual document from the government. The Sykes-Picot Agreement. So basically what you see here is him working with the government during a very difficult time, because the British are dealing with a lot of entities. They have a Jewish military, the Jewish Mule Corps, which we talked about, which Weizmann, along with Trumpeldor, helped set up. They worked at, they fought at Gallipoli. You're dealing with the war with the Ottomans and possible peace with the Ottomans later on, which you're dealing with the Arab, trying to convince the Arabs to fight against the Ottomans. Think Lawrence of Arabia, who was an ardent anti-Semite, but a great movie. So you have them negotiating with the different groups to give different Arab groups their countries, working with the Ottomans, working with the Jews, negotiating with the France, with Germany, their enemies. So there's a lot going on. And the Jewish picture for us is the central picture, but there's a lot more. I mean, there's Russia involved as well. I mean, you got everybody involved. This is a world war. And Israel is a very tiny little place. And you got different agreements. You got Jews meet. Now, this is a different time period. I mean, Chaim Weizmann is meeting with Arab leaders, no big deal. There wasn't this ardent anti-Semitism yet that we're going to see, except for people from like the Mufti of Jerusalem. But he's meeting with Arab sheiks. They don't always agree with what he wants to do, but they're meeting with him. And it's not. So all of this is going on. And so he gets this. He speaks with Lloyd George. He gets, the Balfour Declaration. And even though a lot of the British community, probably the majority, was against it, but he got it. And that will serve as the precedent. So, and he will be the father of the synthetic Zionism. That's kind of what it's called, which is kind of like creating Zionism from the outside and the inside. It's the political, getting all of the people on the big stage to help actually create this state, which is not what David Ben-Gurion was doing. David Ben-Gurion is more on the inside. He is trying to get the outside world to help support this, and the Balfour Declaration is still going to be used as the basis. Plus, the Sykes-Picot is going to be used as the basis for the Peel Commission, which is going to be used as the basis for the UN. So the Sykes-Picot agreement with France that after the war, they would divide up the Middle East amongst themselves to give freedom to do what they wanted to do. In the meantime, they're creating the Balfour Declaration, they're negotiating with Arabs, so they're making deals with lots of different people for the same land, and these deals don't match each other. So this is what's going on. So after the war, we see that Britain decides to do something different than what they had planned with this area. They do create countries, you know, like Jordan and Syria and Lebanon. But what is Palestine, they can't figure out what to do with it. And so they just set up a British governor to be in charge of it, which was a blow to, of course, Weizmann, a blow. I mean, it was kind of a vague thing that was going on. And so even though they had pledged to Zionism to help out through Sykes, through Balfour, through Lloyd George, it didn't happen. Weizmann met with Prince Faisal to try and create some sort of state of Israel to negotiate with them. You know, it was not a big deal. I mean, he's meeting with, today, that would be a huge deal if the Saudi prince or the Saudi king met publicly with the prime minister of Israel. Back then, it was not such a big, it was fine. So this is what happens. He goes back and forth to Israel, but he's never living in Israel permanently. He is doing it from the outside, which is why he is going to be overtaken by Ben-Gurion as the leader of the Zionist world, because Ben-Gurion is living in Israel. He's the guy who's on the ground. And Weizmann still to this time is kind of the leader, national leader. He's going to be the head of the WZO for a very long time. But he is also very loyal to Britain. He is a citizen, I believe. And so he wants to stay there. He's meeting with Americans like he's meeting like Louis Brandeis, who he gets along with. They have a rift. He's meeting with Albert Einstein, who you may or may not have heard of. Brandeis was the leader of the ZOA, which is the American Zionist organization. He's helping to do fundraising. He's creating scientific institutions. He's trying to get people to work together, and that's what he's doing. So this is all before the Holocaust. He's encouraging immigration and helping Jews immigrate there. And of course, which runs him smack into people like Montagu who say, no, people should stay where they are. But obviously not that many people from Britain are moving to Israel. Who's moving to Israel? Mostly Eastern Europeans, people who are in places that are not as nice to live for Jews. This is what he's doing. He has setbacks and he has successes. One of the big setbacks is going to be the white paper, which is created by the British government in 1929 or 30, which restricts the number of Jews who can enter Israel each year, which obviously he was working to stop. But then he helped by testifying before the Peel Commission, which is the commission that is set up in the 1930s, when Hitler is now in power, to decide what Britain should do with the land. And what does the Peel Commission say? We should divide what is now Israel into a section for Jews and a section for Muslims. The Peel Commission report from 1937, I think, is going to be what is used for the UN in 1947. England does not want to do it. They like staying in control. The Zionist leaders, both Weizmann and David Ben-Gurion, were very supportive of the Peel Commission recommendations. The Muslims were not, so it was rejected. He also was very much not quite as aggressive as we talked about Jabotinsky, who believed that all European Jews should move to Israel because there was impending doom. He didn't know about the Holocaust. He said in 10 years we should move everybody. And Weizmann was so very supportive of that idea, but he wasn't as aggressive. He was encouraging, but not same way as Jabotinsky was. So this is what he's doing. He is the political leader of the movement. And that is what we're going to see him do the entire time. And he did have issues with people and so, but of course, he was working all the way with, when Chamberlain became prime minister, he's still trying to convince him to help Jews move to Palestine when they then set up the 1939 white paper, which even limits Jews going even more. So this is an issue with him because his own government, who he supports, is now limiting Jewish immigration to Israel at a higher rate with all the issues that are now going on in Nazi Germany and an impending war. So this is a blow to him, but he continues to be supportive, works with Churchill. He is the one who, convinced Churchill that partition might be better than alternative plan. Obviously, after World War II, Churchill lost the next election, so he wasn't able to promote this. He would be. So any questions about Weizmann so far? Hope I'm not going too fast. So this is a brilliant man who is a scholar, a scientist. He is a politician. He served as in various capacities. He was the Minister of State to the Middle East during part of World War II for Britain. I'm sorry, no, sorry, that was not him. Sorry, I got confused. He was the one who helped tell Churchill that they should annex the Negev. And he was the one who tried to calm everything down when Lord Moyne, who was the governor of Palestine, was assassinated by the Lehi, or the Stern Gang. So, yes, Larry. And you're still on mute.
Just to make it clear, after World War I, when they got to the European nations, France, Britain, basically got together to divide up the Middle East, all of the states then, by the 1920s, except Israel, were really independent then. Jordan was independent. Syria was independent, I believe, in 24. Israel was the only one that was still controlled under the British mandate.
No, not at all. Now these countries were set up, but the leaders of a lot of these states were puppet leaders beholden to Britain. It's not going to be till after World War II when a weakened Britain loses all of these places. But they're still in control of the Middle East, France and England, mostly England. So they set up these countries and they put up their supporters and they decide who's going to be the leaders in most of them. Saudi Arabia was an exception. So the governments of Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, and several others are all controlled by England. I'm sorry, Larry, you're on mute again. Sorry.
On many of the maps that I've seen, the countries have the sole name, whereas Israel still says British Mandate of Palestine.
Right. They could not figure out, oh, sorry, I put you, they could not figure out what to do there. So instead of making it a country and putting up a puppet Muslim leader, they just sent their own governor to run it. And sometimes the governor was supportive of the Jews, most of the time he wasn't. But this is what happened. So despite Weizmann's efforts, Britain would be often very antagonistic to the Jews, especially after World War II, when they were losing so much and they didn't want to give up another place. So he is there he's even trying to convince the British government to pay off countries to let Jews leave, pay off Poland, negotiate with Eichmann to allow Jews to immigrate to Israel, pay them off. So he's doing quite a lot to try, and he wanted them to use his technology to bomb death camps. He was like, bomb the camps. So some things he was successful for, and other things he was not. But by the end, he knew what he needed to do. And, he tried to get a Jews. So he gets to be a little bit older. He is now not the leader of the Zionist movement anymore. He had some success. He had some failures. And then he has one of his greatest success later on. So he's getting older. He's sick. He's not going to be in the government. And what is one of his last great achievements before becoming president of Israel is his relationship with Edward Jacobs, known as Jacobson, Eddie Jacobson. Now, Jacobson has become a very famous person in the Jewish world. He was a Jewish traveling salesman, not an ardent Zionist. Was a regular Jewish guy. He's a traveling salesman, and he's minorly successful. He's a good guy, really nice guy. And how has he become so important?
He was Truman's friend.
That's right, because he served with Truman in the military, in the army. And then they became business partners. Although their businesses didn't do that well, they still ended up being very good friends. And for many years, whenever he was in Washington or wherever Truman lived, he would visit him, and they were always really good friends, maybe even best friends. And so all of a sudden, his best friend or one of his best friends is Vice President of the United States. And then his good friend is President of the United States. And he's just visiting him, and he's a really nice guy. And Truman wrote about his friend who never asked him for a favor, even when he was becoming an influential politician. They just were good friends, just buddies, until Eddie Jacobson, by this time, we're talking 1948-ish, Truman had it with the Jewish community. There, we had like Abraham Hillel Silver, or so whatever. A lot of the Jewish leaders were very abrasive, and they're calling him all the time, and they're visiting him all the time, and it's just so, we need to move to Israel. And he had just gotten really annoyed with all of them and didn't want to deal with them. Congress was not very supportive of Israel, of this prospective Jewish state, but the cabinet, which wasn't his cabinet, was not. The cabinet was dead set against this. So what does Jacobson do? He's on a visit. He says, listen, man, never asked you for a favor. You have your heroes. Truman's big hero was Andrew Jackson. I have my hero, and my hero is still alive. And his name is Chaim Weizmann. And he's an old man. He's not in good health, but I think I would really appreciate it if you would speak with him. And so he speaks with Chaim Weizmann, and Chaim Weizmann convinces Truman to support the UN partition plan, which, passes by one vote, basically. So, and who is the first world leader to congratulate David Ben-Gurion when he announces a Jewish state on May 14th, 1948? The most important one, President Truman. And so that was kind of the last great moment of his where he helped America support, and that American support was essential because, as we talked about maybe previously, I don't know, once America supported, they got other countries to support it because other countries could care less. And if America supported it, we'll support it, whatever. And they put pressure on other countries that could care less and say, we're going to give you some good deals on this, just support this in the UN. And voila. And so this is what he did. So this is a man who helped do a lot to create. Probably the Jewish state may not even happen without him. He gave his life to this. He thought the Muslims would be fine with giving a piece of the land to the Jews, so that's what he supported. He didn't realize how antagonistic things would become, but he is essentially one of the most important people in the creation of the state. And so when the first Knesset met, and a year later, he was elected the first president of Israel. The president of Israel is also a ceremonial position. He decides who's going to form the government, but that's all he does. Another person who was in the running who refused it was Einstein. Einstein was also in the running, and I did not want to do it. So he did want to be part of the government, though. I mean, he wanted to move to Israel and be part of the government, but that was not his destiny. And he was already sick. And although he had done so much, he was not an insider in the country doing stuff. He's doing it from the outside. So he didn't even get into it didn't even become part of the Knesset. But obviously, Israel would probably have not become as technologically savvy of a country without him, would not have had a lot of connections without him, would not have had the Peel Commission or the Balfour Declaration, the support of America. They would not have had the number of people moving there early on during his support. So he would not have had, so this is a man who is essential to state. His nephew would become also president. He would die living in Israel. He would be given his home there, which is now a museum. I don't know if any of you ever, met him, heard of him or had family members who met him, but he was, very outgoing apparently. So, and, he and Ben-Gurion butted heads a lot because his was more of an intellectual, political Zionism, where Ben-Gurion was more of a, agricultural, social Zionism. So, but even though their reputation for butting heads terribly, probably not as bad as that. I think they got all along most of the time, but they still had a lot of issues with each other. So, any questions or thoughts?
Well,
Michael.
I guess, in terms of butting heads, I mean, if you're talking about after the establishment of Israel, I mean, the president's kind of a figurehead.
Right.
So
by that time, he's old and sick. It was not, we're talking earlier, he is the world leader of the Zionist movement. And then all of a sudden, this guy from very humble backgrounds, who was not intellectual, did not go to school, came to Israel to be a farmer, basically, all of a sudden usurps his role in the late 20s and 1930s, really. And so that was very difficult for him, not to be the leader of the Zionist world, as Ben-Gurion became it, because that's what he thought he was. In fact, when Theodor Herzl, he talked about Theodor Herzl, he had one son who wasn't a Zionist, but eventually became sort of a Zionist. and nobody knew him. And he eventually was invited to an event with Weizmann, and there was a big, here comes Theodor Herzl's son. And Weizmann kind of turns around and ignores him during his entire speech, overtly. I don't know if he saw him as a threat, but he may have saw him as a little bit of a threat, even though this person was actually, probably not. But again, he was, people sometimes have, ambitions, and they can get worried about their political. All people are like this, as we know. Larry.
Yeah, when Truman signs that famous document, and we've seen it in the museum in Independence, Missouri, there in the library. Did he do that, do you know, by executive action? Because, as you said, his cabinet was not totally in favor, of alliance with Israel. Nowadays we're talking a lot about executive action, whether the president could do this or that. I was just wondering whether he needed congressional approval or.
He did not. He did not. This was executive action. This is support through the UN. This is a recognition what the head of state of our country can do. So, yes, he did it completely on his own, against the will of his State Department. Against Congress was very supportive of it, but this was very, very much against what his advisors were telling him to do. So yes, it was completely by himself, according to history. I could be wrong, but that's what I've always been told. And who knows what was really going on? I'm sure there were other things going on as well. But yeah, and again, it wasn't that Truman was an anti-Semite. He was meeting with all these Jews. Again, Israel is a far off country in the middle of nowhere. I mean, today it's much more well known and it's in the news every day. But in 1949 and 48, unless you were Jewish, nobody knew what was going on. It was like the war's over. Why worry about a small little war in the middle of nowhere? And as president, he's got Muslims and oil and Britain and France and the aftermath and trying to right the country and worried about re-election all going on at the same time. Most people thought he wasn't going to be reelected. So just the fact that, he was, everybody remembers Dewey, the paper, was it Chicago Sun Times that did that, or Chicago Tribune? I can't remember. So there's a lot going on. By all accounts, Truman was a very nice man. And, but this was not a big, for us, it's a hero. It's a big deal. For him, it was, well, I'm saying, yes, I recognize a country of a few million people in the middle of nowhere that has no strategic advantage of any kind to us at all. And obviously did not know that what would happen in the future. If they had known what happened today, what the controversy in Israel today, who knows what they would have done. But Ben-Gurion and Weizmann the Peel Commission was a big one. They both were supportive of the division of the mandate by the UN that was based upon the Peel Commission. They were both very supportive of that, and that was essential because they knew they would try and get whatever they could. And this was at a time where both of them were very influential, and they had to convince the WZO, the World Zionist Congress, to support this partition plan, because there were a lot of Jews who were saying, no, we want the whole thing. And when Ben-Gurion and Weizmann came out saying, no, we want to support this, well, that carried a lot of weight. And so that's why it was supported, although it didn't amount to anything then, but it would set the precedent very much so for what happened 10 years later. So he is a great man and one of the greatest leaders in the Jewish world of all time, bar none. And so unfortunately, he's not as remembered as he probably should be. I think a lot more people know of Theodor Herzl, and certainly most people who are familiar with David Ben-Gurion. But he's somebody who should be remembered. So any thoughts or questions? We're going to go ahead and do Ben-Gurion in the next 6 minutes, get it all done. That was a joke. We're going to do Ben-Gurion in 2 weeks. Obviously, Ben-Gurion will take maybe even 2 sessions. But again, what we see between these people is very diverse. I mean, they're both from Eastern Europe, Russia, but they have very different paths to leadership, almost polar opposites.
Mhm.
And we'll see that. And this is how they were as people. Ben Gurion was a brilliant man, but he wasn't, educated in fancy colleges, and he wasn't a scientist. You know, Herzl is hanging out. I mean, Weitzman's hanging out with the prime minister and lords and Rothschilds and probably barons and dukes. He's very famous. And Ben Gurion is working the land and, working as a day laborer during this period, trying to, can't even get jobs in Israel because the Muslims are getting jobs, and he needs to find a way to say, why is this happening? So we'll see that in 2 weeks. But any other questions? So he's really an amazing figure, and one of my heroes and everybody else's, because Zionism exists because people went different routes. You needed Herzl to set the domino. You needed Weitzman with his political connections and his money. You needed Jabotinsky and Trumpeldor to teach us how to defend ourselves. You need a Hada'am to teach how to be a Jewish person who's a Zionist, who's not religious. You need Rav Kook to say you can be Orthodox and support Israel. And you need Ben Gurion, especially with the labor movement, because we got to work the land. We can't be dependent on Muslim workers. We got to do it ourselves. You need Rothschilds who are going to purchase area and money, all these wealthy Jewish people who are purchasing land from the Ottomans, like Schiff. And so you need all these people. Karen.
No, I was going to ask, and I don't know if you know the answer. Any idea how many Jews there were in Palestine prior to World War II?
Prior to World War II, it was around 350,000, I believe.
That many, okay.
Yeah, and it was not about that much way before, because remember, the immigration was limited in the 30s. So I think it was 350,000. I can easily look that up, though, yeah.
No, because Stuart's grandmother's sister, his grandmother obviously came to the U.S. from Warsaw. Her sister was a Zionist and went to Palestine in 1921. And apparently her brothers they had 3 brothers who wanted to join her in Palestine, and she kept discouraging them because there were all kinds of problems with the Arabs.
Oh,
And-
I am wrong. I looked it up.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
about 450,000.
Oh, so it's a lot. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, I mean, P.S. They all died. 2 of them we know died in Auschwitz.
But,
And
yeah,
never
but
made it there.
And that's 1939. There probably were a lot less in 1938 because,
Okay.
and I may be right in 1938 because of what's going on in Europe.
Right.
The white paper
Right.
doesn't come till 1939. So
Okay. Okay.
anywhere from probably 350 to 450,000. All right, Larry, last question, then we'll conclude. And reminder that I will not be leading the class next week because I'm going to be at this wonderful social justice conference. Larry.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that we were just shown at Temple of Shalom the movie called 1945, which is about some Hungarian Jews, and they went back to their home.
Right.
And what was interesting about that is that that just in 1933 was the first Maccabean game, strangely enough. I think it was 33. And the British were in favor of doing it, even though they controlled it. And there was some Arab protests, and they said that the Arabs living in Palestine, in the Jewish area, could still, should be permitted to perform in the Olympics, in the Maccabean games. They issued you had to take an oath that you were coming from another country, that you would not stay in Israel. And I think there was a large Jewish immigration that just kind of ignored the oath. And I think there was almost 50 to 100,000 people that had come to visit the Olympics from mainly European countries. Not Olympics, but I mean the Maccabean Games.
That's awesome.
In Israel in 33, and then even in the following, the second Olympiad as well.
Yeah, and I think we talked about the Maccabean Games before, so that's great. Yeah, and again, we are very devoted to Israel. We have different opinions of the government, but that there was still a faction of the world that did not, the Jewish world that was not supportive, but you didn't have the anti-Israel sentiment as much in the 30s as you did in the 20s and teens. So what we're going to do is just remind everyone that this weekend, when's the film, Larry? Oh, you're on mute again. February.
No, I had already shown that film, and I talked to Terry and Temple.
Oh, that's right. You already showed it.
I showed 1945, but the next film that I'm showing is Zelig, which is an equally important film, and I'm showing that on February 11th. So if anybody wants to, I'll send you a message about it. And in addition to that, for adult education in Temple Oseh Shalom, I'll be talking about the 36 Olympics as well.
All right, great.
And some of the events leading up to it, and also trying to show the differences between the Maccabean Games, which happened to be around the same time, 33, the Maccabean Games, and which is this very strange kind of event, and even the ideas of founding of Israel in the 1890s came about almost at the same time, and Jewish athleticism was not a high thing, but it was promoted at the time, even in the 1890s, as one of the statutes of Zionism.
Yeah, and I think when we think of Jewish athleticism, we think of the building up through the ages till you get to the perfect athletic Jewish person like me. And I am what all the Jewish world since the time of Moses have been working towards is this. So we have perfected the athletic Jew, and now everything is going downhill. So sorry about that. But as for what's coming, Ron, did you want to say something? I don't know if it's Ron or the hand from the Adams family. You're on mute. But Hand, would you like to say anything? I didn't know you could talk because in the TV show you just kind of and you're still on mute. Hand.
Okay. Did anybody see the movie Shoah on TCM a couple of days ago?
I did not. I've seen it before though. So
it was not an 8 or 9 hour movie. It was really unbelievable.
It's a mini, yeah. And again, there will be at the JA somebody talking about the Israel. I think Wednesdays the JA is going to have a speaker who's going to be speaking about the Middle East and the creation of the State of Israel. Upcoming for a synagogue, when we have so much going on. We just had a fabulous weekend, unbelievable. This weekend on Saturday is Food Fest support. So thank anybody who supported Food Fest and volunteered. We're going to thank you for that. Then we got coming up on the 8th, 9th, and 10th, our Scholar in Residence. So on the 8th, we're doing a program at 45 Bistro at 5:30. Free food and lecture, only fill 75. It may be full already. If not, if you want to go, call right now and see if there are any seats left. I know there may be one because my wife can't go, but it's restricted to a little bit of number because of the space. Then, and he'll be talking about Chagall. On Friday night, we have a dinner, which still has spaces. We'll probably have over 100 people for that. There's still spaces for dinner, but do it as soon as possible because Brian has to be able, and we'll be talking, he'll be talking about Jews and the revolution. That's Friday the 9th. The dinner will be afterwards where he speaks after services. And on Saturday, we have a discussion during Kiddush lunch on basically the evolution of Jews and food. How did, for instance, lox become a Jewish food? So we may be having lox at that meal. So that's going to be really exciting. Also, February 7th, we have the breast cancer awareness event here in conjunction with Memorial Hospital, and that'll be on the 7th at 4 p.m. and that is also free, essential. Flossie?
What time did you say the Chagall program was?
That is an earlier one, so it's great for people who may be able to drive. That is at 5:30. It's at 45 Bistro.
Oh, so it starts at 5:30.
Yeah,
Okay.
I know it'll be hard to drive, but it should be really interesting. And it's going to be a 45 Bistro, and we'll be looking at Chagall art. And he's an expert in the field, so it should be really interesting.
What is 45 Bistro mean?
It's one of the best restaurants in town. It's on Broughton Street. Sandy Hollander and Robbie Hollander are members. And It is one of my favorite, if not my favorite restaurant in town. So it's right across the street from Leopold's Ice Cream, and it's in that hotel that's right across the street. That's where I held my wedding reception there for just the family. All right, thank you guys. This has been amazing. So no class next week, David Ben-Gurion in 2 weeks. And I hope everyone has a great week. Hope to see you at all the events. And if you need anything, let me know. Even though I'll be away at this conference in Florida, call me anytime.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everybody.
Really interesting,
Everybody.
It was great.
interesting session. Thank
I
you.
hope it was okay. It's hard to
It was good.
break Chaim Weitzman down into
I
an hour.
know.
Yeah.
I really, thank you.
All right, I'll talk
Thank
to you
you.
guys later.
All right.